Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another daily dose of Ixalan spoilers. So last week was crazy, digging through the huge spoiler dump from Monday, but we are officially caught up, which means today we only have a handful of cards to talk about actually. Some cards that came out over the weekend from packs, and then the official start of spoilers today. The good news is, these cards are super sweet, and I'm super excited to talk about them. So a quick reminder before you get to the cards, if you haven't already, it would be awesome of you if you could take a second, click that subscribe button down at the bottom of your screen. It's a great way to support the channel and the site for free. So let's jump right into it with our newest Planeswalker, Huatli Warrior Poet. Yes, I've learned to say the name over the weekend, so that's a good thing. And this card is pretty interesting. So for 5 mana, you get 3 loyalty, +2 gains you some life, equal to the greatest power of a creature you control. The 0 makes you dinosaurs with trample, 3/3s, and then the X ability, I guess the ultimate we would say, can kill stuff, can also force through damage. So what does Huatli Warrior Poet do? Well, it basically is a combination of 3 cards. The plus ability is quite literally Soul's Grace. Not an exciting card, but if you got some big creatures lying around, the incidental life gain can definitely be very relevant. If you have, let's say, a Ripjaw Raptor or something, having this come down the turn after, gaining 4 life, that's really going to help against decks like Ramanamp Red, any of the aggro decks in the format. The 0 ability is kind of like an upgrade on Gideon's 0 ability. One thing we've learned about Planeswalkers is making creatures repeatedly and not having to spend loyalty on it. So either zeroing or actually gaining loyalty is super powerful, and the tokens that Huatli makes are even better than Gideon's tokens. 3/3s with trample are definitely way better than 2/2 allies. And then the ultimate is very reminiscent of Aurelia's Fury, a card that was super hyped when it was spoiled, but never actually really caught on in standard. But being on a Planeswalker makes it a little bit more powerful. So I imagine that you plus Huatli the first time it comes down, or make a beast if you need to protect it. But if you get up to like 5 loyalty, you can pretty much just ping all of your opponent's creatures and make it so all of your stuff is unblockable and hopefully close out the game that way. You can also use it to kill 1 creature if you really need to, but I think that for the most part, it's going to be this finishing ability where you just make it so your opponent can't block your stuff, swing in and win the game. The nice thing about Huatli is some of the competition that would be competing for this slot is leaving the format. Nahiri, gone at rotation. Gideon, gone at rotation. Which means decks that are playing Gideons and playing Nahiris are going to probably be looking for a replacement, and it's possible that in some of those builds, Huatli ends up being the best choice. The question mark with Huatli, the main question I have at least, is can it beat out Glorybringer? Glorybringer is insanely powerful, and I expect that Huatli and Glorybringer are going to be relatively pretty much competing for the same slot in a lot of decks, kind of the 5-drop finisher role. Is Huatli better than Glorybringer? And I think in some builds it's definitely possible, but you can only play so many 5-drops without your deck getting super clunky. So I think in some decks, people are going to just stick with Glorybringer because it's proven itself to be very powerful. That said, I think Huatli has some really good potential in certain archetypes. So you got a few different possibilities with Huatli. The first thing I thought of was Mardu Vehicles. Mardu's losing Archangel Avacyn in the 5-drop slot. It's also losing Gideon in the Planeswalker slot, sometimes Nahiri's in the sideboard. So it's possible that Huatli can fill in for the rotating Planeswalkers. The thing I really like about it with vehicles is it comes down much like Gideon, makes a token without spending loyalty, and then you can immediately use that token to crew up your Heart of Kieran, crew up your Aethersphere Harvester, something like that. And then the X ability is going to help you force through your Toolcraft Exemplars, all that kind of stuff, and maybe close out the game. It also seems really interesting in a ramp deck, so if you're playing things like Carnage Tyrant, the plus ability gets much scarier. Normally, life gain isn't a big appeal deal to a card, but when you have incidental life gain, and you're gaining huge chunks of life while gaining loyalty, that Carnage Tyrant is 6 life by itself, and you have a big blocker to protect your Huatli, that's going to put games out of reach against aggro. So I could see Huatli being either a main deck or sideboard card in ramp decks that are looking to have really big creatures, because then the life gain gets much more relevant. The other possibility, and this one might be more of a long shot, it can also be a really good top end of an aggro deck. This is where it's most directly competing with Glorybringer, so that's why it's a little sketchy. But if you can just curve out with powerful creatures, play Huatli, make it so 3 of your opponent's things can't block with the ultimate right away, and just attack with your team, that's going to close out a lot of games on turn 5. So I think there's potential in a whole bunch of different ways. I think people are kind of underrating Huatli to some extent because we've just trained ourselves to think of life gain as bad, but I think in this case, the 0 ability is super strong, the X ability has potential to just be game ending, and the life gain is just kind of icing on the cake. It's kind of a nice thing to have around for certain matchups or in certain decks if you're playing big creatures. So overall, I think Huatli is definitely going to see play in Standard. I'm not exactly sure the right home for her, but she's definitely powerful enough that she's going to be tested and hopefully end up being pretty sweet in some Standard decks. Next on our list, we have the white mythic Awakening Sun's Avatar. It's about 1 million mana, but it's a dinosaur, and it has a super powerful ability. Comes down and wraths all non-dinosaur creatures. Of course, to do this, you gotta play it from your hand, so no reanimation shenanigans. But this reminds me of a kind of a string of creatures from the past. Maybe the most direct comparison is Reaver Demon. Comes down, if you cast it from your hand, you blow up all non-black creatures. So if you're playing all black cards, then you don't really hurt your own stuff, but you destroy all your opponent's stuff, which is awesome and potentially game-winning. Kind of like Sunblast Angel, which is more restricted, or Dread Cacodemon, which is only commander legal. So we've seen creatures like this in the past, and they have potential to be really good, but the problem is they're super expensive, so you kind of need to be ramping into them. Although if you're playing Dinosaur Tribal, that's probably not a problem. That's where you need to be with dinosaurs anyway, because they're just expensive in general. Maybe the most direct Standard comparison, or recent Standard comparison, is Descend Upon the Sinful, which is kind of an overcosted wrath that also leaves behind a body, and you have a 7/7 on the ground, which maybe is even better than a 4/4 with evasion. So I think that Awakening Sun's Avatar is mostly good in a dinosaur deck. I don't know if you would really play this outside of dinosaurs. Maybe I could potentially see it being in a control deck as the finisher. It comes down, blows up all your opponent's stuff, leaves behind a 7/7. The problem is 8 mana is just so much, even for a control deck. That's like an ultra late game card, but it could show up as a 1-of there. However, I think this is a great finisher for dinosaurs. So you're already going to be ramping if you're dinosaurs. If you're dinosaurs, you're already going to have huge bodies like Carnage Tyrant, Ripjaw Raptor, and so forth on the battlefield. So you just have all these big things, but your opponent, they're making chump blockers and trying to stay alive. Then you just play your Awakening Sun's Avatar. It blows up all your opponent's stuff, assuming they're not playing dinosaurs. You get to keep all your stuff and just swing in with all these huge dinosaurs and close out the game. So I think that's the primary goal and plan with Awakening Sun's Avatar, is just have this be your ramp finisher for a dinosaur deck, and I think it'll do a great job of that. However, there's some chance, I think, that it could show up as like a 1-of, maybe in the sideboards of control decks as well, because blowing up everything and leaving behind a big body is a really good option for a finisher. So we'll see. There's a chance it shows up there, but definitely, if dinosaur ramp is a thing, Awakening Sun's Avatar is going to be a big part of the reason why. Our last rare for the day is Primal Amulet, which is a really interesting transform/flip card. So all the flip cards, apparently, from Ixalan, start off as something and then transform into land. So with Primal Amulet, you get a 4-mana artifact that makes instants and sorceries cost 1 less to cast, which can already be pretty good. And it's important to note it's not legendary, so you can stack these up on the battlefield. And then whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, it gets a counter. 4 counters, you flip around into Primal Wellspring, which is one of the crazier lands I've ever seen. It adds mana of any color, which is already insane, and then if you spend that mana to cast an instant or sorcery, you copy it for free. No work. It just automatically copies your instants or sorceries. So as far as comparisons, this mostly reminds me of Jace's Sanctum. It's actually very, very similar to Jace's Sanctum, which, if you remember, was a standard playable card at one point. With Brain in the Jar and Rise from the Tides, there was actually a deck built around that, which was really sweet. Primal Amulet loses the upside of letting you scry when you cast an instant or sorcery, but the flip side is so good, it might even be better than just scrying in some decks, because once you start copying things, it's going to be really insane. So as far as just flipping Primal Amulet, it's going to take a bit of work, but we got tons of spells. Glimmer of Genius, only going to cost 3 mana, which is already nice. Going to get you a counter. Any counter spells you cast, like Censor, Brawl's Expertise. So there's plenty of fine options as far as getting the counters on Primal Amulet. So I don't actually think it'll be too difficult. Yes, you're going to want to build around it, but if you think about any sort of controlling type deck, you're casting so many spells that you're just naturally going to be able to get the counters on it, and you can cast your spells even quicker because of the cost reduction effect. So I imagine within a turn or two after untapping with it, you should be able to have it flipped around. And then what do you do with it after it flips around? Well, first off, I got to point out what you can't do with it. It does not win the game with Approach of the Second Sons. This is like a weird misconception that keeps floating around the community. You can't win by copying an Approach of the Second Sons. It just doesn't work because you have to have cast the Approach from the Second Sons from your hand, and you have to have cast the first copy as well. So copying it, yes, you gain 7 extra life, which is fine. I mean, gaining 14 life is not a bad thing, but you aren't going to win the game if you copy an Approach from the Second Sons with Primal Wellspring. The good news is there are some super sweet things to ramp into. So my favorite of the bunch is Torment of Hailfire. So play a bunch of instants or sorceries, killing your opponent's stuff, removal spells and whatnot, to flip around into Primal Wellspring, double up a Torment of Hailfire for like 5 or 10, and it's just going to close out games. So that's an awesome copying target. Also, Saheeli's Artistry is pretty sweet, copying 4 total things. That's a lot of value, and there's probably some sweet combos we could figure out with it if we think about it as well. Even just a pull from tomorrow, doubling up is so much card draw, so I'm really excited for this card and think it's going to be potentially good. Of course, you got to have the right build for it. It's going to be awesome in Commander. Commander loves copying spells. It's going to see play there. So I think that it's an awesome addition, and I'm super excited. It gets the Brewers juices flowing. So we'll have to see where things end up, but there's got to be some sweet implications. We've seen like Pyromancer's Goggles doubling spells in the past in Standard being very good. And while it takes a bit of work to get there, I'm super excited for the potential of free copying with Primal Wellspring. We wrap things up today with a couple of pretty sweet uncommons. So first off, we have Ixalan's Binding, which is basically a new version of Cast Out. You lose some of the upsides of Cast Out. You don't have Flash, you don't have Cycling, but you gain the upside that once you exile something, your opponents can't cast other cards with that same name, which can do some really cool things. So I think we need to break down where each of these cards is good and where they're bad to really figure out which one is better, because they're very directly competing for the same slots in decks. So Ixalan's Binding is great primarily against specific game-winning combo pieces. Like Binding would be a great answer, well, a reasonable answer. We learned with Eldrazi, Marvel was just too good anyway, but for cards like Marvel, where you can exile the first one of them, and you're dealing with all of them, so your opponent can't cast another Marvel. So that's a big upside. We still have like Paradox Engine, and even with just like a Rogue Refiner, yes, it's not insane, but the fact that your opponent might have an extra one in their hand is a fine upside for Ixalan's Binding. On the other hand, Cast Out has some big upsides as well. First off, it hits things at instant speed, which is especially relevant with Glorybringer. Also very important to control decks, because it lets you leave up counter spells like Censor during your opponent's turn, and then still flash in a removal spell if you don't counter something, and if you are light on lands and trying to smooth your draws, you can always cycle it away, which is another big upside. So overall, I think that Cast Out is still, in most metas, going to be better than Ixalan's Binding. I think Cycling and Flash is better than the pseudo, like, Nevermore ability, although I can definitely imagine situations and metagames where Ixalan's Binding, even with the downside of being sorcery speed and not cycling away, could be the right choice, and it's definitely possible we see splits in decks, like 3 cast out, 1 Ixalan's Binding, just as kind of a hedge. They are similar enough that you can do that, so I think it'll see play in Standard, although I think cast out is probably a little bit better, generally speaking. Our last uncommon today is Sentinel Totem, which is another sweet graveyard destruction spell. So exiles the entire graveyard for just a single mana, and you get to scry when it enters the battlefield. So this is kind of a cross between Relic of Progenitus, being 1 mana, kind of having this weird card advantage component, and then Tormod's Crypt, which just sweeps away your entire graveyard for free once it's on the battlefield. So I think that's kind of where the card fits. As far as Standard, the question is Sentinel Totem or Crook of Condemnation, and almost like we were talking about with Cast Out in Ixalan's Return, these two cards serve very different purposes. So Sentinel Totem is going to be great against decks that are looking to just kind of go wide with their graveyard. They just want a bunch of things in their graveyard. An example of this in Standard is kind of God Pharaoh's Gift, because they can get any creature and they choose after you would activate a Crook of Condemnation. So they just want a lot of stuff in their graveyard and they're going to get value from it. Kind of like Dredge in Modern, where it's just a whole bunch of stuff in the graveyard. None of the individual things are that powerful, but the graveyard as a whole is super powerful. Sentinel Totem is great there because it comes down for just a single mana, you get the scry out of it, and it just nukes the entire graveyard for free at instant speed whenever you want to. On the other hand, Crook is better against decks that are looking to get one specific piece out of their graveyard. So the Scarab God, for example, if you leave up a mana with your Crook of Condemnation, whenever your opponent pays 4 to exile something and make the token with Scarab God, you just snipe that one card, because you get to choose the card that's exiled. Also great against reanimation decks. If your opponent's trying to refurbish a God Pharaoh's Gift, Crook of Condemnation is a better option than Totem Sentinel. And same with like reanimation decks in Legacy and Modern, although I don't think Sentinel Totem is going to be good enough to compete in older formats just because there's so many options. So this is another one of those battles that really depends on the metagame. If everyone's on God Pharaoh's Gift as the main graveyard deck, then Sentinel Totem is probably the best option. If everyone's on the Scarab God reanimation plan for graveyard decks, then Crook of Condemnation might be a little bit better. But regardless, it's super exciting to see Wizards printing a bunch of good safety valves, a bunch of good options for fighting these degenerate graveyard decks, which have been traditionally a big problem in Standard over the last couple years because we haven't had these kind of cards. And now we have a ton of different options to make sure we don't end up in situations where Rally the Ancestors just breaks a Standard format and there's nothing you can do about it. So another awesome graveyard hate spell. I don't think it's quite good enough for Modern just because you have Relic, which is mostly a better version of Sentinel Totem anyway, although you never know. Stranger things have happened, could be a budget replacement for Relic of Progenitus. Anyway, that brings us to the end of our daily spoilers for today. So, what do you think about Huatli? How good is the new Planeswalker? Is it going to be a Gideon and a Hiri like a standard staple, or more of a fringe card for certain decks? Waking Sun's Avatar, is that going to make the Dinosaur ramp deck a real thing? Where else can you play it? What do you think about Primal Amulet? Is that just a fun commander card, or is the power of copying for free with Primal Wellspring enough to make a standard deck around it? The uncommons, Ixalan Binding, can it beat out Cast Out? Sentinel Totem, can it beat out Crook of Condemnation? Where do those cards fit in the format? Let me know what you think in the comments. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.